Okay, what do you call the glands of the stomach? Gotcha. Gastric pits, good. And on the surface of a fold in the stomach, a fold in the stomach is a ruga. On the surface of that, there is simple columnar epithelial cells. But down below the surface is where you have the cuboidal gland cells that come in two different stain jobs. The cytoplasm of one stains pink to red, and that's a parietal cell. And that's the one responsible for making the stomach the most highly acidic compartment in the human body, pH of about 1 to 3, due to hydrochloric acid from the parietal cells. And they also secrete an intrinsic factor which floats along until it gets to your small intestine to act as the carrier molecule to carry vitamin B12 into your system. The chief cells with the purple cytoplasm secrete a digestive enzyme, and this is about where we left off last time. Many enzymes are secreted in an inactive form, and they have to have a little amino acid chain known as a polypeptide chain cut off the end of them to turn them on. Things that are released in an inactive form are called zymogens. So you're going to hear a lot of zymogens from now till the end of the semester. So the zymogen that the chief cells secrete is called pepsinogen. And notice that ends with OGEN and that ends with OGEN. A lot of inactive chemicals either start with the prefix pro or end with the OGEN suffix. So that's a hint to you. So when it becomes active, it's cut off that little amino acid chain. The active form is pepsin, and that digests protein. So we were digesting starch due to salivary amylase in your mouth. But when it hits the acids of the stomach, that's going to denature the amylase enzyme, so starch digestion is over. So you only got about 5% of the 100% starch you eat digested at all. So really the only thing the stomach really digests is protein. Back in Civil War times, you know, they shoot the musket balls at one another. There was this troop member, and he got hit in the gut with a musket ball, and it blew open not only his outer body wall, but his stomach wall. And so his surgeon, you know, they didn't have a lot back then in the way of antibiotics, etc. So a lot of times they would keep a wound open so that they could irrigate it with phenol or whatever minimal kind of antiseptic type thing they had. And so they were keeping his wound open for a while, and apparently this troop was a pretty good personality type troop member. And so the surgeon goes, "Hey man, if you don't mind, I want to see what the stomach does. Can I tie different foods on a string and lower them down in your stomach and see what happens to them?" Go ahead. So tied an old hard piece of bread to a string, lowered it down in the stomach for hours and hours, pulled it back out. When it came back out, of course, it was mushy and wet, but it wasn't digested. So not much carbohydrate action in the stomach. So they tied a big old piece of fat off the edge of a hunk of meat to a string, lowered it down in there, left it for hours and hours. Nothing happened, still fat later, so it doesn't digest lipids. So they put the beef down in there, tied it to a string and lowered it down in there. Hours later when they pulled that string out, it was just dissolving off the string in slimy digested protein. So it's due to that guy that we know that the stomach is amazingly digesting protein. And that guy lived to some really phenomenal age, like 76 or something, back in 1860s. That's a long life, so apparently didn't hurt him too much to be the experimental guinea pig. But anyway, that's how we know that story. When you read in your book, for those of you who are meticulous readers, it does say we secrete another digestive enzyme in our stomach. It's called gastric for stomach lipase. Lipase implies it digests what? Lipid. But the truth is, the minute that lipase hits the acid conditions of the stomach, it's denatured. So I don't know why we'd be making lipase when it really can't digest fats, because it gets denatured instantly. But it is secreted by your gastric pit stomach glands. There also are some enteroendocrine cells that secrete hormones that interact between your stomach and small intestine. We'll be talking about those hormones at the end of this discussion. So the name of the hormone is gastrin. It basically activates your stomach because obviously you've received a new load of food. And painkillers like endorphins are produced by your stomach. You would wonder if some animals like sharks that eat license plates and all sorts of things, you'd wonder if they make more endorphins because they can just eat bone and everything. But we secrete these endorphins from our brain and from our stomach and various locations around the body. So hormones like this might account for why some people endure pain easier than other people. There is also a substance P you learned about last semester in your brain that inhibits pain. So, you know, if you had a lot of substance P and, no, I said that wrong. Substance P makes you feel pain. So if you made a lot of substance P, you might be the weenie that can't stand any pain, or maybe just your endorphin level is low. But if you made a lot of endorphins and not so much substance P, you might be somebody who can endure pain. But anyway, just an interest comment. All right. The stomach is a unique digestive organ because of the tubular organs that the food passes through. This is the only organ with 3 layers of smooth and voluntary visceral muscle. The innermost layer is the layer that is unique. It runs at a diagonal, and so that's the oblique smooth muscle layer. All the other digestive organs like esophagus, small and large intestine have these 2 layers, the circular layer and then the outer longitudinal layer. Now, because you have muscle running in 3 different dimensions, your stomach can chop and churn the food 3-dimensionally. And that's why your food is reduced from a bolus, an undigested food ball that went down your esophagus, to thick pea soup, which we call chyme. So if it leaves the stomach, it's going to be the consistency of that soup, and it's now not called a bolus, it's now called chyme until it becomes waste. The distal end of the stomach is that very strong muscular sphincter called the pyloric sphincter. So we think if it's sort of semi-liquefied like this, if that sphincter just relaxes a tiny little bit, then the semi-liquefied food can spurt on through to the small intestine. Any undigested particles would be retained back in the stomach until it too is semi-liquefied. So we think that's how that works. Every 15 to 25 seconds, these involuntary muscles are contracting, and they're doing that whether you have food in your stomach or not. They're doing it all the time. So when you think you hear your stomach growl, and you think it only growls when your stomach is empty, well, the sound growl does only happen when your stomach's empty, but it's caused by these tonic mixing waves. But when your stomach is full of food, that acts like an insulator. It absorbs sound, and so you don't hear the growl or the noise from the tonic mixing waves when you got food in it. You only hear it when you don't have food, because now it's like an echo chamber. So that's caused by these muscular contraction waves. Enough on the stomach for now, unless you have a comment, question. Then we're moving on to the small intestine, which is where the majority of digestion and food absorption occurs. In fact, there is no digestion once you exit the small intestine. In an adult, this is a 21-foot long organ, and the first part is only 10 inches long. That's called your duodenum. It is the part that hooked to your stomach. So we could go up to a mannequin, because it did come off the stomach, and be able to point to that loop and say, I know that's duodenum, because is the part that came off the stomach. But where the duodenum ends and you get to the next part, which is 7 to 8 feet long, and in most of us is anterior loops of your small intestine, that is called jejunum, and you cannot tell where that ended and this began if you're looking at a torso model, because there is no difference in the look outside of the organ. Microscopically, there's a huge difference, and we'll see the difference between these three small intestine regions, but you wouldn't know where the jejunum begins and ends. The last part is called the ileum. It's 10 to 12 feet long, and it's usually more posterior or dorsal, in other words, behind the jejunum in most people. But we all don't loop and twirl the same way, so you can find exceptions. I even know a guy who had 2 intestinal tracts. So, you know, there are weird things that happen. So, how would you know you're in ileum? The only reason you would know, you could point to any part of the ileum and know, is because this is the part that's going to dump into your large intestine, your colon. So at the point that it's joining the colon, you would know that that's ileum. But you wouldn't know where jejunum end and ileum began unless you had a microscope to look inside. So let's go back up to duodenum. Think of where you're coming from. You're coming from the acids of the stomach. So the duodenum has to protect itself from that highly acidic chyme that's pouring in. And so it has glands that these other 2 segments do not have. It has Brunner's glands in the second layer called the submucosal layer. And they secrete lots and lots of extra mucus to help protect the walls of the duodenum. If all this food is coming, then we need to spray it with some digestive enzymes because we want to finish our digestion and actually absorb this food in the small intestine. So you've got glands of the small intestine themselves. Those are called crypts of Lieberkühn, and you can spell crypt with a C or a K, either way. Lieberkühn is a German word, but those are the intestinal glands. So they make digestive enzymes. And they think the way that these digestive enzymes are secreted is that the columnar cell lets go, and inside the columnar cell is the digestive enzyme, so then the columnar cell deteriorates as it mixes with the food, and that's how the enzymes are released onto the food. So you learned about those in Anatomy 1. Glands that release their secretions by the whole cell leaving are called holocrine glands. Remember that story? Okay. But it is into this very first part of your small intestine that ducts from the other accessory glands, the glands that food doesn't go through, have ducts that dump in. So liver has ducts, gallbladder has ducts, and pancreas have ducts, all that ultimately dump into the common bile duct and join the small intestine. So we got lots of other enzymes and hormones that are going to come in and mix with this food. Are we okay so far? Does that make sense? The ileum, and by the way, make sure you spell this right because you had an ileum bone in Anatomy 1 and it was ILI, so this is ILE, so big difference. When you get down to the ileum, your food is pretty much digested and ready to be absorbed. So here you are inside the protective body. You've got moisture in there. Remember, you're supposed to be drinking 8 glasses of water a day. You've got digested food in there. You've got the temperature balanced at 37 degrees C. You could be a parasite who didn't even have a digestive tract and survive fine right there. That's why you have a tapeworm. It just absorbs all your nutrients. Remember Elle, the beautiful model? She had a tapeworm deliberately put in her GI tract. Isn't that disgusting? So that it would absorb her nutrients so she'd stay sleek. I know. You'll study tapeworms in microbiology, but if you have a pet, you'll know your pet has tapeworms. If you see a worm doing like this, flat, inching up and down like that, that's how a tapeworm behaves. Whereas hookworms are this kind of get ready for the emergency room. People come in and worms are in their vomitus or coming out their nose, or it's a shocker, so get ready. I was telling somebody, when a lot of people, go abroad to adopt their kids, when you adopt kids, I'm picking on Russia because one of our staff members here adopted a couple of kids from there, but they're in orphanages and the living conditions are just horrible, and they almost always have parasites, and the parasites have become so indigenous in that kid's muscle tissues and GI tract. Just one treatment to kill the parasite doesn't take care of the problem. For months and months or years, you often have to treat these babies to get all the parasites out of their system. So we don't, we complain about our health care and its expense, but we are very fortunate over here. Okay. So the point is, with all this perfect environment of already digested food, the ileum tries to defend itself by having little nodules of hundreds of white blood cells. And they don't just have one little lymph nodule, as we talked about last time. They have all encircling the whole ileum. They have one beside another, beside another, beside another, just like in your lymph node. That is called Peyer's patch, these lymph nodules. And remember what lymphoid nodules are full of. They're full of white blood cells, lymphocytes to make antibodies to attack with, and macrophages, white blood cells, to phagocytose the attacker. So that is definitely defensive tissue. In your body, there is a, these are all mucous membranes, and it's called the mucus-associated lymphoid tissue, the MALT tissues that are found around your body with lymphoid clusters in them, nodules. This part of the MALT, the mucus-associated lymphoid tissue, is called the GALT, the gut, because your GI tract is considered your gut, your gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So it's just trying to prevent infection from taking hold. So the GALT I've written out for you. The MALT, you change the first word to mucus. All right, so if this 21-foot long small intestine is the organ where we're going to absorb food, it's got all kinds of adaptations to increase the surface area so that you have lots and lots more cell membrane across which to absorb food. So if this is a tubular small intestine, all three parts of the small intestine have extensions, which you'll see in lab today. Each one is called a villus. The plural is villi. And in between, so that increases the surface area. In between the villi are the glands of the small intestine, which invaginate downward. Those are your crypts of Leverkuhn, so I've pointed at one of those. So those are your glands. And we have talked about a villus before, so if I take this villus, one, there it is, and magnify it, in the center of this villus was a lymphatic lacteal, the capillary that absorbed the, so if I draw it over here, the capillary with an open pore on the end that absorbed fat-filled food. So that was called a lacteal. And it absorbs so much fat that lymphatic fluid is whitish. That is called chyle, lipid. It's not chyme, general digested food, it's chyle, lipid-filled food. So that's what is absorbed into the terminal pore. Almost exclusively, that's where fat uptake occurs. Then if we look at this villus, it's got the cell that is only attached down at its base, simple columnar epithelium, so it can be soaking up food on 5 other sides, the 4 tall sides and the top, And then if you magnified one of these simple columnar cells, the surface of that simple columnar cell has elevations. Those are called microvilli. They're just cell membrane folds to increase the absorptive area on the surface of the cell. Microvilli don't beat. They remind you of cilia, but cilia are motility structures. These are just increasing the surface of the cell. So food starts by leaving the small intestine and coming through the microvilli, and then it's in the columnar cell. And then the columnar cell has to start spitting it this way into the villus. And then in the villus, if you're not fat going into a lacteal, you instead got absorbed by a blood capillary that surrounded each lacteal. So you're either going in the lymphatic capillary or you're going in the blood capillary. Which I think I have all this on the very next page. But now, we don't want your semi-liquefied food running along the bottom of the sewer pipe like sludge. We want it slung up so all the sides of the small intestine are coated. You saw last time in lab the duodenum, pancreas, spleen model. And inside the duodenum you saw these little circular folds of the mucosal layer. Those are called the plicae circularis, and the whole point of that is it spirals the chyme up onto the walls of the tube. Any question on this page? Okay. So yes, I did put the capillary over here and the lacteal. And also in the mucosa layer, some of the simple columnar cells are single-celled glands that secrete mucus droplets to keep this mucus epithelium. So that's a goblet cell. You studied those in your airways as well. The further you go down the digestive tract, the more goblet cells you'll see. So it's interesting as the labs go by, you'll see a very few in the stomach if you notice them at all. Then you get to the small intestine, and if you look at the duodenum versus the ileum, versus the jejunum in the middle and the ileum at the end, there's more and more goblet cells. And then you get to the colon, the large intestine, goblet cells are everywhere. So it'll be a very obvious thing as we're looking at the different slides in the next couple labs. So that's to keep the intestinal lining protected and it to moisten the chyme as well, so it'll move along properly. From the glands of the small intestine, crypts of Lieberkühn, there are all these types of secretions. This is collectively known as your intestinal juices, if you're using American type terminology, intestinal juices, or in some books it's kind of Latinized, it's called the succus entericus. Intestinal juice or succus entericus. Entero is a prefix that means intestinal. So the second word, like sap of your intestine, entero means intestinal. So we'll be talking about some of the hormones and the role of this enzyme, enterokinase. What would proteases be doing? What does that prefix sound like? Yes, so there are a number of protein digesting enzymes that come out of the crypts of Lieberkühn. What are carbohydrates is going to work on? Starch and sugars. And what are nucleases going to work on? Nucleic acids, genetic material. What are lipases going to work on? Fats, lipids, triglycerides. And then lysozyme, you had this in Anatomy 1. It was in an organelle of the cell called a lysosome, and it was to kill invading organisms that were engulfed in a vacuole. This will kill bacteria in your intestinal tract. Not all of them. It's just trying to keep the proper amount of bacteria in check in your intestinal tract. Those are called our normal body flora. So we always have some. We just don't want the wrong bacterium to get going in there. Like I mentioned to you, Helicobacter pylori. That's a bacterium that gives people a lot of gastrointestinal disorders, or discomfort, I should say. There is a cell that I will be mentioning in the near future called a Paneth cell. We don't have a model or a special slide that makes it a different color than the other columnar cells that are down here in the crypt of Lieberkühn. But the Paneth cell is the very deepest cell in the crypt. So now when I mention it, you'll know where it is. Now, I've already mentioned the Brunner's glands and the duodenum that are mucus glands because of the acid chyme entering at that first part of the small intestine. Muscle in the small intestine. It is the two layers, the inner circular and the outer longitudinal smooth muscle layer. But if all the chyme is digested, it can make both of those layers contract from an earlier point in your small intestine down to a lower point. And that is called propulsive peristalsis. You know how you get a toothpaste tube? And you could either squeeze the toothpaste tube, that would be like your inner circular smooth muscle layer. And that moves a little toothpaste forward out the distal end of the toothpaste tube. But you could also roll up the end of the toothpaste tube, which shortens the tube. And that also will cause toothpaste to move out the distal end. So if you do both of those two things at the same time, roll and squeeze, you're going to move faster and more of the contents of that tube distally. And that is exactly the way propulsive peristalsis behaves. It's not rolling up your small intestine, though. To shorten it, it's doing it like an accordion. Like you take a athletic sock and shorten it in order to pull it over the blob of your foot. That's what your small intestine is doing to shorten the tube, and it's literally pulling the small intestine past the food. And then if it has the constriction waves, then that too moves the food out of that area. So that's if we're trying to empty a certain area of the small intestine. But in the small intestine, because it is the major digestive organ, you could just stimulate only the inner circular layer by itself. And you can do it randomly. So if this were a big piece of small intestine, you'd be going like this, constricting the tube here and there. That's not going to move anything out of that area of the tube, but what that's going to do is thoroughly mix your chyme, your food, with all the digestive enzymes that are secreted into the small intestine. So it chops the chyme up and mixes it with the enzymes. So it keeps it being digested thoroughly. That is called rhythmic segmental contractions. Rhythmic segmental contractions. If instead you only stimulate the outer longitudinal muscle, it's going to do the accordion thing to that part of the small intestine. So if it's doing this, this starts slopping the chyme, the semi-liquefied chyme, up on the walls of the tube as you shorten it and lengthen it. Those, because it's kind of like a pendulum, that's what the chyme's doing inside, is sloshing back and forth as you go like this. Those are called pendular movements, but that's just your longitudinal muscle. So you do have special nerve plexi, nerve networks associated with your small intestine that can have these local controls to do these specialized movements. So we'll come back to those nervous controls later. But are we okay so far? Now we're to the large intestine. Why is it called large? It's only 5 feet long. Yeah, it's diameter. It's bigger around than small intestine. So it's a shorter tube, but it's a bigger diameter, therefore large. It can be called large intestine. It can be called colon. It can be called large bowel. All of those are proper names for this organ. It doesn't digest food. Now, if you did digest food, but it all didn't get absorbed in your small intestine, the large intestine might pick up the last few things. It usually is just things like water, vitamins, and minerals. Most of your major food groups that you had to digest have already been taken up into your bloodstream. But water, vitamin, minerals could be absorbed here. So no digestion, minor absorption. Very important for returning your water back to your body, though. So in your pig today, we find out their colon or large intestine is mainly balled up like a rattlesnake. You see, ours doesn't look like that at all. Ours looks like a curtain over your window, a drapery. And so the beginning feature that we have that the pig doesn't have is a little worm-like appendix. It's called a vermiform appendix. They think there's major white blood cell nodules in there, so this might be a lymphatic organ to defend you against disease. So they used to say, oh, an appendix is vestigial, it doesn't have any function anymore. 40 years ago, they'd snatch them out right and left. Now they usually only take your appendix out if it is infected and it's inflamed and you run the risk of it bursting. If it were to rupture, I just told you have normal body flora, bacteria that live in there. That would spill those bacteria out into your peritoneal cavity. That leads to peritonitis, an infection of your peritoneal cavity. If you don't bring peritonitis under control, it leads to gas gangrene. Gaseous gangrene can kill you cat quick. So that's why we get upset when troops get hit with shrapnel in their gut, because you can't get them out of the country sometimes that quick and get them the help they need. So those are always wounds that are very likely to go gangrenous. All right, so it is an important organ. And it isn't that just we have it. A rabbit has an appendix, so I don't know why a pig doesn't. I don't know the rationale there. But they do have this area of their large intestine. So this would be the first part in the pig. It's called the cecum. And so you notice that the small intestine, which I'm representing right here, dumps in right at the top of the cecum. Therefore, that little connection is called the ileocecal valve or juncture, because the ileum of the small intestine is joining the cecum of the large intestine. So you'll see that in your pig today. Then in the human, on a torso, you're going up, so that's ascending colon. Right up here is your big old liver, hepato, so this is your hepatic flexure. This is your transverse colon. Over here is your spleen, so this is the splenic flexure. Now the wastes are moving downward, so that's the descending colon. Then you get to the funny little signature, like a question mark. That's the sigmoid colon. Then you're running erect, that's the rectum. And then you get to a canal that proximally is controlled by a muscle sphincter you can't control. So that is the involuntary internal anal sphincter. And then this one down here that you could learn to be potty trained and controlled is your voluntary external anal sphincter. Therefore, it does have some length to it, so it could be called the anal canal, or anus, but now you see why sometimes anal canal. There are other names for the hepatic and splenic flexure in your book as well. So some of these things have more than one name. What is the large intestine for? It's for largely squeezing the water out of the solid waste. And so you have pouches. Each pouch is a haustra. And there's muscle that runs across each haustra. So here's a haustra pouch, here's a haustra pouch, here's one, here's one. So the muscle is blended together with a little bit of connective tissue. That muscle and connective tissue is called the taenia coli or collantanea, and it squeezes a haustral pouch, which propels the waste to the next pouch, and it's squeezed again, and that happens over and over again from pouch to pouch. So what would your problem be if you retained feces in the colon too long? Yes, you would have hardened fecal material. In other words, it could lead to an obstruction of your bowel, because if it accumulates and accumulates and you don't eliminate it, you're going to get a dilation where you have a large accumulation of feces, and that can be impossible for you to pass through the tube that's of smaller diameter. So we are very, very guilty in this country of being, what's the word I want? We're too willing to use laxatives. I can't think of the word I want, but we're not addicted to them. But you know, we all think, oh, the pretty body is the sleek body. So a lot of teenagers and young women use laxatives as a way to hopefully not gain weight. And so they'll take fiber additive pills or drinks, and to act, because fiber is bulk and it pushes on the walls of your large intestine and moves the materials out of your body at a faster pace because it gives you the urge to eliminate. Or we take other laxatives that instead act by relaxing your sphincters so it's easier for you to eliminate. I mean, there's all kinds of different ones. So number one, we shouldn't do that, because now if every day, once a day, you take a laxative, and some people take them after every meal, but if you take it once a day, now your body is waiting for that chemical signal to hit it before you eliminate. And so your body it's like your body buys into your new regime. Your regime now is, unless I get my bulk fiber, I'm not having a bowel movement. And so then you get old. Well, just like everything else loses tone and tension as you age, so does the smooth muscle of your digestive tract. So older people have sometimes got problems with loss of tone or muscle rigidity and moving fecal material out of their system. So they might now need a laxative. But if you've used laxative all your life just because you want to hurry up and go before you go to work and you want to be skinny and all the thousands of reasons we have, then now there isn't anything on the market short of dynamite that will help your problem. And so it is not at all uncommon if you work in an emergency room or a nursing home where older people are often housed by their family because the family doesn't want to have anything to do with them because it's too much trouble. Then, and I'm not saying anybody in a nursing home doesn't belong there, but a large majority of people in a nursing home know why they're in there, because everybody else doesn't want to take care of them anymore. But they often get impactions, and because they need some help eliminating with chemicals or laxatives or something. So what do you do? Start with and give them stool softeners to try to loosen up that fecal material. But short of that, you've got to go into the digestive tract through the anus and help remove that impacted fecal material so they can eliminate. Otherwise, it's going to start killing parts of their large intestine. Yeah.
Kind of off topic, but now like going over everything, like how each thing gets squeezed in the small intestine. My boyfriend's niece, I think she's 7 or 8. She has stomach issues and like indigestion and stuff like that. But she got so backed up, she had hard stool all the way to her stomach.
People will throw up fecal material. They can get so backed up. No, seriously, they can get that backed up. Yeah. And, you know, it's, that's another reason why.
If you have like bowel obstructions, like the walls of your intestines can stick together, and once it starts backing up, your body starts recognizing it as a foreign object, and then it starts coming out.
Yeah. Bringing that up, that's why let's say you went to the hospital and you were in surgery, so you were anesthetized, they're not supposed to let you go home until you urinated and had a bowel movement. And there was that short period of time when we first got to the let's cut medical costs, where they do surgeries and zip, you're gone, and they skip that step some of the time. And now they've backed up and rethought that because too many people went home, and some people don't wake up from anesthesias as well as the other person. And so they might have still been not active in their digestive tract. They get home and they don't have a bowel movement, and that nothing moves, and it rots. And then you come back in, and now you've got to do a removal of part of their colon. So it's a major, major thing. You don't want your loved ones leaving until all systems are go. But, you know, easier said than done. You know, some cultures, you just don't do things like that outside your home. And it's very hard for some people. That's why some people are so close-minded about things like colonoscopy exams and stuff like that. You don't understand cultural difference from one country to another and what they're not going to do in public. So it's very hard. Not to say that even, you know, least little thing can set you off, as you know. So it's a difficult thing. But you can see where retaining feces too long, you know, your day is busy, you're doing 1,000 things, school and kids and jobs and whatnot. You don't take time for yourself, then it stays in there and too much water gets absorbed. Now, constipation. That's constipation. But we lead to constipation too because in our busy lifestyle, we don't drink enough water. And if we do drink, we're drinking the wrong damn thing. We're drinking a dehydrator. We're drinking coffee that steals the moisture out of your body. We're drinking colas, which are caffeinated and stealing the moisture out of your body, or Red Bulls.
High sugar drinks, which increases your blood sugar, which makes you feel.
Yeah. All these things that we have to be very, very careful what we do. Yes.
This kind of goes back into the whole digestion thing. My mom works at a nursing home. She's been working there for quite a few years now, and she's not like an actual nurse, but she does see a lot of the patients come in. And she says one of the biggest problems I have is either they go too much or they don't go enough.
Right.
So you can always tell just by them walking in like what the problem is.
Yeah. It's not fun, but you know, I tell students, you think about it as someone you love, though. What if it was your little baby, or what if it was your little granny? You just get a bigger bath towel and triple glove and get the job done. But anyway.
Everywhere.
Yeah, but anyway. It's very sad, but. Now, I'm going to come back to this story in just a minute, but I'm not quite to that page. So, if this organ is for absorption, even though it's mainly water with an occasional vitamin, it has ridges inside too. But the ridges can't go all the way around in a circle like the plica circularis of your small intestine because this connective tissue, tania coli muscle band got in the way. So they go halfway around and then halfway around the other side. So they are called the plica semilunaris because if you could see the inside of the large intestine, they look like half-moon-shaped ridges on the inner wall to make the water spiral up on the wall as it's squeezed out of a fecal ball. Guess you can call this a shitty lecture. So in addition to that, because we're trying to absorb, this is lined with columnar epithelium again, the cell that has the greatest amount of surface area. And because we are reconsolidating solid waste, you need the moisture, the lubrication to move it along. So that's why your goblet cells secreting mucus are most numerous here. So now you see why, if this is large bowel, this physiology is referred to as a bowel movement or defecation. We'll get that at the top of the next page. Defecation, defeces, removal of fecal material. It has the same glands, crypts of Leverkuhn, but notice you don't have the villus sticking up in between because it's not as much absorption, it's just the water. So all of this is covered with the simple columnar epithelium and goblet cells. The vocabulary word for squeezing the feces in a hostile pouch is called hostration. And feces is the name for the solid waste. And if you've eaten, let's say your typical 3 meals a day and your 8 glasses of water so that the digestive process can proceed the way it's supposed to, it's pretty efficient. Mainly what fecal material is made out of is dead, undigestible fibers like cellulose that we don't have the enzymes to digest. And microbes, that's where the most mass comes from, is the microbes. And then some protein pigments. Most of the color of feces is due to protein foods that you've eaten. So those pigments are called indole and skatole. But bile that was made in your liver and concentrated in your gallbladder and squirted on fatty foods in your small intestine, bile is forest green. So that is also a pigment that contributes to the color of feces. Why am I being so graphic? Because coloration of feces is another diagnostic tool. For instance, if someone has white fecal material, they're going to start thinking something bad's wrong with your liver, cat quick. So it is another diagnostic tool. And then gases, and 2 of the gases are odorless, hydrogen and carbon dioxide. This is methane. Just a molecule or 2 of methane will make you totally socially unacceptable. Did I tell you the story about the aquarium that came in the department? This was 2 bosses ago, and we had a great boss, and she had very dignified, but she would just smallest little smile every now and then if something was funny or something. So we're sitting in here one day and we're lecturing away, and I get a whiff, and I think, somebody's not behaving. But I was this way, and I thought, that's pretty bad. What am I going to do when I turn around? You know, somebody's going to be looking at me going, what the heck? So I turn around and people are kind of going like this. They're trying to be very polite, you know. And it's just getting really obnoxious, worse and worse. And so pretty soon people are kind of going like this. And I'm sitting there going, how could this be? You know, you're thinking the plumbing must have a major problem. And, you know, so all of a sudden we look by and people are going by in the hallway. This is the dead of winter. It's cold. And people had on little snow hats or whatever, going like this, pulling down over their nose. So we knew then it wasn't in this room. And by now, you know, guys are making jokes. I thought it was him, you know, this asshole. But anyway, so when we're seeing everybody go through in the hall, oh my God, what's in this building? Then I said, well, if chemistry is doing unknowns, we know what the answer is. It's methane, because it was bad. So about then, here comes my very prim and proper boss, and she goes, do you know something I don't know? So she takes a tour upstairs and down through all the bathrooms, peeking her head in all the labs to see, did something blow up? Is something wrong? Turns out somebody, some girl, had an aquarium that the lid snaps down on, with some mucky ooze in the bottom of the aquarium with some critter down in there that she wanted to talk to her biology teacher about. But she left it in her car over the weekend, and so when she brought it in the lab and she set it down on the counter, it kind of thumped a little bit. Well, I guess the gas had expanded and that lid went boof, and all that mucky funk is what had fermented or putrefied or whatever. And that was the source, but I mean, it cleared this building. It would make your hair curl. But anyway.
I can't imagine what it did when it blew off. It probably burned her hair off.
I don't know what she could have had in there, but she must have incubated it for a while because it was fierce. So since we're on that subject, like I said, D, the elimination of feces, FEC. So defecation is one vocabulary word for elimination of fecal material, and the other name is a bowel movement, therefore the abbreviation BM. That's another funny story. We have a friend, and he has a little kid. He's a commercial fisherman. And so he had his first daughter, and he was going to name her something whose initials were BM. And my husband and I looked at each other and we go, no, Robbie, you're not going to do that to your sweet little girl, are you? What do you mean? I said, don't you know what a BM is? Everybody at school is going to call her names her whole life if you give her those initials. So he didn't name her that. He named her, is her name Anna Nicole? Yeah, he named her Anna Nicole, and then the last name. So we didn't dare say anything about the Anna Nicole name. But anyway, okay. Well, you got this little baby, and your baby's sitting in the high chair, eating with little Cheerios, or spaghetti, or whatever you're willing to clean up that day. And you no longer get him all gooed up, no sooner get him all gooed up, than his little nose and nostrils start flaring, and his cheeks start puffing out. He turns bright red. His eyes are bugging out. So you know what he's doing. He doesn't recognize the urge. He doesn't. So don't get mad at your kid however long it takes you to potty train them. I guarantee you they won't go to college still messing in their drawers. But the thing is, some cultures think you're a horrible mom if your kid is not potty trained by age 1. So see, there's another thing. We don't always know how different peoples of the world respond to things, but shoot, you don't mind changing a few more diapers? That's between you and your husband. Don't sweat it. They'll get there. But anyway, the point is you've got to get your child to recognize the urge. So what happens is when you're putting new meals in the proximal end, the digestive tract is getting ready for it by eliminating from the distal end. So commonly the urge comes in infants when you're feeding them a next big meal. So you can get ready for that and have all your little potty chair or whatever it is. And so then when you see them, you can put them on the potty chair, and if finally they're successful, then they start recognizing the urge with what happens. And maybe you'll be more successful that way. I don't know, I lost it. But anyway, that wave of peristalsis happens 3 or 4 times daily. See, that's your 3 or 4 big meals a day. And it starts in your transverse colon, so it doesn't run through the whole large intestine. It starts in the transverse colon, and it pushes the feces down into your rectum and fills up your rectum. And the rectum is where you get the urge, because in the rectum are pressure receptors. So when you distend that tube, when you stretch that tube as it fills, you're going to fire those pressure receptors. When you're running your digestive tract, is that parasympathetic or sympathetic? Feed and breathe. Is that sympathetic or para? Parasympathetic. Ease, emergency, exercise, emotion, energy burning, that's sympathetic. So when we have less to do, we have energy that we can expend on our digestive tract. So parasympathetic reflex happens. So the pressure receptors fire, it carries the information to the sacral region of your vertebral column, and immediately the sacral region sends out an exiting neuron, an efferent neuron, back to the involuntary smooth internal anal sphincter, and that's going to relax. So it's allowing that to relax. In other words, it's inhibiting the firing of the nerve that causes it to constrict. At the same time, that it's sending that information out here to relax the internal anal sphincter. This involuntary parasympathetic efferent neuron is hooking up to a voluntary nerve because skeletal muscle is voluntary. You just might not have learned how to control it yet. So that somatic nerve, that voluntary nerve, is called the pudendal nerve, and it controls urination and defecation when you're potty trained. So it's going to the skin and muscle of your perineum. Your perineum you studied last semester. That's your pelvic floor, and in this case we're talking about your external anal sphincter, and it inhibits that nerve so that it relaxes and you eliminate and defecate. The only time you can stop this relaxation thing from happening and elimination occurring is when you learn the urge in your conscious center so that your cerebrum can go, now is not a good time. And so then your conscious center, your cerebral cortex, sends an impulse to stop this pathway of inhibiting this process so the muscle opens up. We don't want it to. We want it to fire so the muscle contracts. Okay? So that's learned. Can you wiggle your ears? Me either. But when you potty train your kid, don't get mad when he's not potty trained unless you learn to wiggle your ears in the same amount of days you've been trying to teach him to get potty trained. It's the same idea. You have to learn to recognize the sensation that you're not recognizing before. So it can be a challenge. Although I'm coming back as a guy, because they get to pee in Coke bottles and all that stuff. On a bush outside. You know, that would be a lot easier a kid to train because there's all kind of little gimmicks to it that you can get them interested. All right. Now we're moving on to the glands that have ducts that dump into your small intestine, specifically your duodenum. But these glands don't have the food passing through these glands, so they're not considered digestive organs. They're accessory glands. They just communicate with the digestive tract. So the biggest gland in your whole body is the liver. We think it is an outgrowth of epithelium that used to be part of the lining of the duodenum, but it's maintained a connection by way of a duct, and that duct is the common bile duct. So that carries the secretions ultimately into the duodenum. And so you thoroughly covered the liver parts in the lab, so notice you're still expected to know them for lecture. The liver does a lot of things. And some of these things you would think then the liver should be a good organ to eat because it's full of a lot of stored food. But then you'll see other things that the liver does. It also modifies a lot of toxic waste. So there's a split out there, and I don't know what to tell you. I'm just telling you what the argument is. Some people say eat liver, it's full of a good vitamins, minerals, stored food, but don't eat liver because it's full of toxic waste. So I don't know. But the main cell in the liver is a cuboidal epithelial cell called a hepatic cell, and that's the gland cell that makes the secretion of the liver, which is called bile. And bile has at least 3 different things in it. It has a lubricant or an emulsifier called lecithin. You know what an emulsifier is? It's kind of like your laundry detergent. It emulsifies oils and filth in your clothes, so it'll dissolve in the emulsifier so it comes out of your clothes and therefore your clothes come clean. This, the role of bile is to emulsify fatty food so that it mixes with fatty food, and so instead of it remaining in your body like a whole stick of butter, it separates it up into little tiny cubes of butter, except even smaller. I'm just trying to give you something to relate it to. Did I say it digests the fat? No, it just fats tend to be gunky and stick to each other. It just breaks the different fats apart from other fats so that now the enzymes that really digest fat can get to it. That's called emulsification. So we need a lubricant that's going to dissolve in the fat. Lecithin is that. There's a pigment called bilirubin. We talked about this in your first lecture test. This is a component necessary to build bile. And then there is cholesterol. which is part of it, and that's known as collates in your bile. So all of these things together then don't look the color of bilirubin, yellow-orange pigment. It then becomes a forest green or hunter green looking secretion. Once you make this bile, it's going to be stored in another gland that we're fixing to talk about, which is your gallbladder. If you get stones in your gallbladder, the proper vocabulary word for that is a biliary calculus. That's a stone that is made from bile mixing with food stuff incorrectly. A lot of your doctors don't analyze your biliary calculi, your gallstones, to see which food is in there. Sometimes it's chocolate, sometimes it's caffeine, because a lot of times the solution to your problem of stones is gallbladder surgery, remove your gallbladder. So why would they waste the time to assess it? Now you're not going to be making any more biliary calculi because they've removed your gallbladder. But if they weren't removing your gallbladder, if you just have little tiny ones, they might assess them and see which foods you need to avoid, because in your body they're mixing with the bile and forming these stones. But a lot of doctors don't even fool with that. You do, however, have to make sure that when you remove biliary calculi, you look in all the little ducts, because if the stone is down in one of those common bile duct or anything, cystic duct, you got to get it out, because otherwise you're going to close that person back up and they're going to go right back into their pain that radiates across their abdomen. And there's no pain like it, they say. It is excruciatingly painful for people. And by the way, I showed you that large intestine like a drapery. Everybody's doesn't drape the same way. Sometimes some people's descending colon will flip up, and so you'll actually be having appendicitis, but you think it's up here by your liver and that you're having a gallbladder attack, but it's just your large intestine may flip a different direction. Those kind of things are easier to tell now because we have all these various types of imaging that they do. But back in the day, that's why they would go, well, when I got in there, I saw it was your appendix that was inflamed, so I took that out. I left your gallbladder alone. But these days, you usually know before you go in because they've done imaging to look at it. Okay, so hepatic cells are important, and we'll come back to seeing them in a minute. Things that are, here's the deal. When your small intestine or stomach lets the food get absorbed into your bloodstream, the very next place it's going is to your liver. And your liver decides, what shall I do with this food? Shall I let the individual body cells have it, or should I store it up, or should I build it into something else? So you store fat-soluble vitamins in your liver, which are A, D, E, and K, and that means if you overeat them, you could be homeostatically imbalanced, like people who take too much vitamin D and cause themselves to get spurs and osteoarthritis and all kinds of irregular early closure of growth plates and bones and stuff like that. So you want the right amount of vitamins. You don't want too much. It stores minerals and certain things that are in pigments like copper and iron. And as I said, it decides whether you should send the fat out to the cell to let the fat break it down to make ATP out of it, or whether it should store it in the various fatty locations of your body. More than 50% of your fat is stored in your subcutaneous layer beneath your skin as a big fatty blanket to hold your body heat in. If you didn't eat cholesterol, your liver's going to build it 2 carbons at a time out of something else you ate. So that's why we need to eat a little bit of cholesterol. HDL, high density cholesterol, they want that over 30 milligrams percent. LDL, the low density cholesterol, that's the bad one. They want that below 130. So if you add the two numbers together, you shouldn't exceed 170. Some doctors think they're a bit obsessive about the 170, that's too low. So your doctor may still let you go up to 200. You talk to your doctor. The reason there are wars about this with doctors is HDL is good for you. And so this is the one of things like avocados and salmon or shrimp, you know. But so if your overall count is more than 170, but it's more than 170 because this is high, like up at 70, which would drive this then to 200. Your doctor may go, well, I'm not really worried because the one that's high is your HDL, the healthy one. So that's a discussion between you and your physician and what your whole assay shows is going on with your cholesterol. Glucose could be stored in your liver. If it is, it's converted to glycogen starch. So we never lose these important energy molecules. We'll store them if you're not needing them, send them out to the cell right now. But if later you need sugar in your blood for your brain, or you need sugar in your body cells, then glycogen will be broken down by your liver and sent back out. So it's telling you it can store it or it can shove it back this way in the reaction. The liver doesn't make fat, don't misunderstand. The only place you can make fat is in an adipose cell. But the liver can take the fats that have entered from your digestive tract and store them or export them or break them down. But the only place you can make more fat is in fatty tissue. That's why you have to be careful with liposuction. You suck it all out and get it all looking real good, but they sucked more out of this side than they sucked out of this side, and then you fall off the dietary wagon, then this side has more fat cells, so you're going to be lumpy and bumpy, if you know what I'm saying. So it is what it is. Yes.
What is the HDL and LDL thing?
HDL is high density cholesterol, and I mimic or nickname it healthy because it's stored by the liver and it is not exported back out to your vessels. So it can't be the one that accumulates in the vessel walls causing atherosclerotic plaque buildup and high blood pressure. This one, LDL, is low density cholesterol. And it is the culprit that is shipped out, exported by the liver to your vessels. And therefore, if you have too much of it, this is the ATHERO, atherosclerosis causer, which makes you hypertensive. Both of those things, the atherosclerosis plaques, hypertensive, high blood pressure, those are two factors of coronary disease, which predisposes you in the worst case scenario to a heart attack in the future. So you don't want that. So that's why I'm saying they don't get that upset if this one's a little higher than 30, but they get really upset if this one starts going above 130 very much. Okay, so my point is, you see, the liver has all kinds of wonderful things in it that would be good for your body. So some people promote it. Plus, it's a cheap food to buy. When my husband was in college, you get a little teeny bit of money from your parents so you can eat. And he lived with about 4 or 5 other guys in a little house. And so when they all got their food money, that was a good night. They all went shopping in the grocery store. And that was usually spaghetti dinner night, because somebody knew how to make spaghetti, I guess. And so that was a good meal. But you know where a lot of the food money went. Beer. So as the days went on, it got scarier and scarier. So they always ate liver because liver was cheap, so they'd have more money for beer. And so by about the 3rd night, they were eating potato chip sandwiches because of the beer. And they were out of food money. And so then they had some, don't do these things now, they'll put you under the jail. They had some little outside restaurant that had a refrigerator out on the back porch where it stored its big tubs of macaroni salad. So they got in the car and they were going to go get some dinner, macaroni salad out of the refrigerator on the back porch. When they got home and they opened it up, they had this much sour cream. It wasn't macaroni salad. So anyway. But needless to say, we're not allowed to have liver in our house. Because he had so much liver in college, he doesn't ever want to see liver again. Okay, so here's the flip side why people don't want you eating liver. It's your major organ of detoxification. It changes toxic chemicals into a less harmful form. When our bodies digest a lot of protein around in our body, there are unusable pieces of the protein. And a big unusable piece is an amino group, which is an NH2 or NH3. An NH3, for example, is called ammonia. If you get lots of ammonia in your body, it'll make you very, very basic. And in the worst case scenario, you could go into convulsive seizures. And if it was your diaphragm or your heart, you're toast. So your liver doesn't want you having a lot of that floating around. So it takes that waste, combines it with a waste gas, carbon dioxide, 2 of these and 1 of those, and it builds this. There's an NH2, so you lost a hydrogen. There's an NH2, so you lost a hydrogen. The 2 hydrogens are right there. There's the carbon dioxide, you lost an oxygen, it's there. So your liver ends up making urea and water. Who gets the urea and water next and gets rid of them for you? Your kidneys. So your liver's turning this into a form of something that the kidney will eliminate half of every time it goes through. I guess we're out of time today. We'll finish this story on the liver and we'll move to pancreas and gallbladder. And that's just going through structure. Then we're going to look at foods. How did they get digested in your stomach, your small intestine, all the way to the end. That's where we're headed with this.